I'll tell you who should start alongside Zion Williamson for the New Orleans Pelicans this season. And yes, Brandon Ingram is in there, but I have some stats that might make you say otherwise. It's Friday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, final show of the week. And this is going to go in a slightly different direction than I was expecting as I dove into this. And I'll walk you through what I mean here with the starting lineup for the Pelicans in just a minute. But of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Look, I want to kind of get right on into this one because, well, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So today's show took on a slightly different direction, though we'll keep it somewhat similar, than I was truthfully expecting. And this is what's fun about this job when you kind of learn something or think about something and go in a different direction or kind of go down a rabbit hole of this. I put out the calls I've been doing during the offseason of what do you want to hear about on the show? And there were a couple of good responses that we're going to use for today's show, but Don B, it's at Leave It, the number 2_B_Rich, good taste in bars, by the way, dude. Put the question of what's Jake's starting lineup and why? And I like this question, just who would I start and why? And the obvious thing that jumped out to me was this. Just play small ball. DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson. No Daniel Tice, no Carlo Makovich. Just a small ball lineup that basically gets your best, most logical, realistic, good lineup that's balanced out there on the court. You can have CJ come off the bench. You can have others come off the bench and rotate guys through. But I like this lineup. It just maximizes kind of what you have. And while I think you could use a little bit more shooting in there, Ingram for CJ, something like that, you're not going to not start Ingram, right? Zion's a lock. Ingram's a lock. Murray is a lock. Herb is a lock. And if you're not going to start a center, you're going to start Trey Murphy for the shooting and everything he gives you. This lineup is tall, it's big, and it works. It's switchy, right? Yeah, there's no rim protection there, but we talked about it in yesterday's show for the everydayers that I don't know if you need a ton of rim protection if you don't let people get into the paint. Murray and Herb should really help you with all of that. So that kind of eliminates that. Look, yeah, there are centers that might eat the Pelicans' lunch a little bit, but if you look at the Southwest Division, the division they're in, and you go through those teams, OKC, like maybe, they're not going to just feed hard, or sorry, OKC isn't even in it. I'm thinking of the playoffs there. Dallas, their starting center is going to be Derek Lively II, who's a lob threat and not like a post-up high scoring threat. I'm not really worried about him, right? The starting center for the Houston Rockets is Alperen Şengün. Like, oh, okay. Like, let him try and carry that team. They were slightly better when he went down injured at the end of last season. Victor Wembanyama, no one has an answer for that. So even if you started a center, who cares? It's not like they're going to do anything against Wemby. And then you have the Memphis Grizzlies with, Zach Edey, I guess, is going to be their starting center. And yeah, he's kind of a post-up player and can maybe feast, but that means they're not feeding Desmond Bane. They're not feeding John Morant. I'll take my chances if those guys are quiet because they're just going to give it to Zach Edey the whole time. I think, the overall concerns about opposing centers is maybe a little bit overblown, right? Go back to the series against OKC in the playoffs before we get to the real meat of this part here. And this is probably going to carry over in the next segment too. They didn't feed Jonas Valanciunas. There was a clear advantage for New Orleans there. And some people were screaming, like, get him the ball, feed him, let him do his work. And the Pelicans didn't, because if they did that, they weren't getting the ball to CJ. They weren't getting the ball to Brandon Ingram and some of the other guys that you need them to do well if you want to win games. I don't think Jonas Valanciunas scoring 30 every night was going to help the Pelicans in that series win a basketball game. And so if that was the case, let other teams not win games by doing a similar strategy. So I dove into the stats a little bit to see what this looked like last year. I filtered on cleaning the glass, which is one of my favorite tools to use for finding numbers and, will things work? You want to balance the eye test and what you see on the court with the stats and what they tell you should do or what has worked and what hasn't worked. So I sorted by last season with the players on court being Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy, and off court being Jonas Valanciunas and Larry Nance Jr. Those were really the only two centers that played, and there's no lineups here where you need to worry. We can take Cody Zeller out of this too, actually, because that was really the other guy. We'll filter that lineup. So basically no center in the lineup. And what did it look like with Zion and Trey out there? So in theory, this is a small ball lineup. You'll get some Jeremiah Robinson early in here, but it doesn't truly matter. 525 possessions, and honestly, their net rating was really good, plus 10.5. The offense was good. The defense was even better. So that alone right there tells you can make a small ball lineup at least work. It's very limited sample size, but there's something there to it. And then I looked even further, and this is where things got surprising. That first lineup that played the most possessions of 525 there's one lineup with 70. That's the most. CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson. About as close to what we just described as you could get, sub CJ out from Murray. It was a minus 24.3 in terms of net rating. The offense was terrible. The defense was terrible too. That lineup didn't work. All right, that maybe tells you this can't work. But then you get a little bit deeper, and that's when things really surprise you. So I did a similar search. Zion on the court, Trey on the court, Brandon Ingram on the court, Jonas Valanciunas, Larry Nance Jr., Cody Zeller off the court. 180 possessions, minus 4.8 in terms of a net rating. When you have Brandon Ingram on the court with Zion and Trey and no center, it doesn't work. It didn't work last year because as I started looking at these lineups, every lineup that had Ingram in looked to be a negative. Now, that's not entirely true. There's some where it's positive, but for the most part, the lineups that played the most minutes with him, Trey, and Zion, and so essentially no center, were not good. Then I decided to search without Brandon Ingram. Zion Williamson on the court, Trey Murphy on the court, no Jonas Valanciunas, no Larry Nance Jr., no Brandon Ingram. What do you think Cleaning the Glass said? I'll tell you after this break right here. So that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by my favorite eBay Motors. And they're my favorite because my cars are all running because of eBay Motors. Whatever it is you're looking for with your vehicle, speed, power, style, utility, eBay Motors has you covered. I'm working on a 50-year-old car. I can order a piece of window glass for it. Any part I need, they've got, because they've got over 122 million parts for your vehicle. You're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. I've used other places before. You order a part, it doesn't exactly fit, and now you're stuck with a part that doesn't fit your car. So I also shop there because the prices are good. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home a big win. Keep your vehicle alive over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. For your second listen, Locked On NBA. There's no off season in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I just teased it. And you can probably guess where this is going. And this is going to sound like I hate Brandon Ingram, which a lot of you claim, and is not true. I think he's actually getting to the point where he's like an underrated player. But the fit is very much a question. And if you're trying to win games this year, that fit is the most important thing. Every year since they've basically drafted Anthony Davis has been make or break. But since Zion Williamson, this has been every year is the biggest year. They've never gone through like a true rebuild or anything like that. So every year has kind of been the biggest year here. So we looked at Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, and Brandon Ingram on the court with no center. Wasn't good. Then you take Brandon Ingram out of the equation. Zion on the court, Trey on the court, no Jonas Valanciunas, no Larry Nance Jr., no Brandon Ingram. We said with Ingram on the court with those three, it was a negative 4.8 net rating. That's really, really bad. Without Ingram, with those two on the court and no center, so small ball lineups, it's a positive 14.7. Positive 14.7. Now, it's only 385 possessions, so very limited sample size, but the early returns looking at this are good. And then you start to see a trend develop, and I'll tell you what that is. Jose Alvarado, Najee Marshall, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, 60 possessions plus 25. CJ McCollum, Dyson Daniels, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, 60 possessions plus 28.3. Jose Alvarado, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, 50 possessions plus 37.6. The early returns on those type of small ball lineups are good. And when you look at the key to this is, I see one thing here. And this is why you can maybe make it work with Brandon Ingram. Looking at the lineups with Zion at the 5, essentially, what you start to see is this. When they have 2+ defenders, like good defenders that you would call on the court, things are okay. That could be Dyson Daniels and Herb Jones. That could be Jose Alvarado and Najee Marshall and Herb Jones. Jose Alvarado and Herb Jones. As long as you kind of have two defensive-focused players in a small ball lineup around Zion Williamson, the data seems to say that that works. Ingram is not considered a positive defender. That's fine. That lineup we talked about, the one that played the most, of CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, having a negative 24.3 net rating and 70 possessions. So the largest sample size of everything we've seen here. There's one defender in Herb Jones. You add another defender and those lineups start to unlock a little bit. Well, here's the thing. And that's what makes us excited about this, right? If we're looking at who starts, let's work with Ingram, Trey, Zion are in. You then just pick your two best defenders, which is DeJounte Murray and Herb Jones. It's exactly what we said in the beginning part, that's what the starting lineup should be. So there is evidence to suggest that even though Ingram in these lineups last season looks like a negative, he'll be just fine in there and probably give them a little bit of what they need in terms of creation and some scoring alongside Murray and Herb. That's the important thing. Two defenders in there. Now, you saw this a little bit with other lineups last season. Sometimes you just need a guy who can defend in an offensive lineup, just one guy, and it unlocks it. Look at, CJ McCollum and Jonas Valanciunas lineups last year that put two other shooters on the court, plus Herb or Dyson, and that seemed to work. Sometimes that's what it takes. So as long as you have 2+ defenders in Murray and Herb out there on the court, I think you can make a small ball lineup work. Trey gives you good size. Herb can defend fives a little bit. Trey can try. Zion can try. I think there's enough there that you can maybe make that lineup work, and there's evidence to suggest that those lineups should do pretty well. It's a little bit of a risk, certainly, but at this point, I just want to put like the most logical, best lineup out there on the court, and then you can kind of adjust as you need to with your rotation. Do you need more shooting? Do you need something else? It's worth mentioning that these lineups look like they have struggled a little bit with defensive rebounding, but the defense has still been good. They're forcing a lot of turnovers. You put Murray into those lineups, they should force even more turnovers. We talked about that in yesterday's show. So all of that is to say that I think this is probably your best logical starting lineup. I get that they probably want to run a traditional center there. Daniel Tice, Trey Jemison is a guy for like 2 weeks I've been saying keep an eye on with that sort of thing. I get it. But I just want to win games. I want to put the best lineup out there. And there's also something to be said for forcing teams to react to you. Is Edey playable if you're running a small ball lineup like that can just kind of get around him? You park him at the rim. Herb's going to shoot threes. Trey is going to shoot threes. Murray is going to shoot threes. You have Ingram in the mid-range there. Like, you can use Zion as a bit of a decoy, I think, with some of those lineups to just use his court gravity to open things up for other guys. And guys are going to make shots. There's 3 shooters in that lineup. Three-point shooters. And if Ingram shoots threes, that lineup looks pretty good for spacing the court and making teams pay for the attention that they're going to put on Zion Williamson. So there's reason to believe that those lineups will do, pretty well here. So we're going to get into the hot seat for Willie Green, David Griffin in the next segment. We're going to mix it up here along with kind of developing young players. I want to answer another question here, though, which was pretty good. And this one comes from Mark A. Rudd on Twitter here. And this is in kind of piggybacking off of the article that Christian Clark wrote for NOLA.com when he got a hold of the Smoothie King Center renovation report and everything. You should read that if you haven't here. And he says, what is the lowest level of success that would necessitate a financial upgrade to the Smoothie King Center? And truthfully to me, as we switch topics here, it has nothing to do with the level of success for the team. Winning games, not winning games, anything like that. The reason you need to invest in the arena is one thing. This is why it's the biggest story to me. I mean this in the nicest way, but the fan experience when it comes to this isn't the most important thing to me. Like, obviously, we want to have a good fan experience. I go to every game. I sit in season tickets as opposed to immediacy for a reason. I enjoy the games. I want to do all of that. The reason you need to invest in the arena, and the reason that to me this is a big story, again, not the fan experience, not for driving revenue or anything like that. I, to an extent, don't care. It's if you want the team to be in New Orleans, you need to have an arena. Gail Benson will pass at some point, hopefully not anytime soon, knock on wood here, and the team will get sold. It's just a matter of fact. There aren't any heirs there, right? They can't get passed out. It's going to get sold. The way that you tie the team to the city is through a lease with an arena. If you have a bad arena and like a 5-year to 5-year to 5-year lease, right? Not a 30, 40, 50, 100-year lease. A couple of years, you're going to see the team move. It's that simple. You invest in a new arena, and by doing that, you tie the team to it long term in a contract they can't break. You're good to go. The team's never leaving. If you have this lease, which ends in 2029, and you don't have a new arena or a plan for that, that's going to be here before we know it, you're in trouble. You're in trouble, and the team potentially moves. So to me, the biggest story, when I talked about this last year, again, the arena being a little bit decrepit and other things, yeah, it's freaking old. The most important reason to spend the money to upgrade it, whoever is doing that, is to make sure the team doesn't leave. Because that's the only thing that will actually prevent that from happening. Anything else you can probably get around. But a lease that keeps you here long term is how you do that. That's the most important thing. So the reason you want to invest in that is not because of the team being good and you want to reward them or anything like that. It's you just want an NBA team here. Simple as that. So I hope that answers that question. So coming up next, Willie Green on the hot seat, David Griffin on the hot seat. Are they? Should they be? I'll answer that question for you coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like? Or what was that? Or, is that something you just did when you were a kid and now you don't need to do it as much? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, we sometimes lose that curiosity. So what's something you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, maybe finally beat your best friend in basketball here. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because, your back to school era can come at any age. And therapy is not just for people who've experienced major trauma. It's to learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, just empowering you to be the best version of yourself. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, and that's why I love it. Designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And for your second listen today, look, Saints season starts this weekend. This is going to be the final Locked On Pelicans episode before their season starts. So go make your second listen Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold. Football is back. We have made it. Basketball's around the corner, but right now, make Locked On Saints your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we kind of talked the starting lineup. Like I said, the show was going to kind of evolve as I was doing it, and we were going to kind of time it out for where we needed to go with it. But I thought the data and the stuff behind there was interesting. That says, like, maybe don't start Brandon Ingram. Obviously, you're going to start Brandon Ingram, but I do think the data also says, like, with two defenders, Murray and Herb, as long as Murray's elevating his defense, which I really think he will do, I think you're going to be in a really good spot this season for everything, even with Ingram there. But look, he skipped the team workouts. That's not a great look. And have the Pelicans made a mess of this whole situation? I think that's a bit of a valid question to ask, though I don't think it's the end of the world yet. So this one comes from Metatron, at Metatron_rules. Is Willie Green on the hot seat? Is David Griffin on the hot seat? I want to say that the answer to this right now is no, but I think it could change as the season goes on. I think they both have potential to be on the hot seat. It might come down to winning and losing, but beyond that, it's how are you losing? Which is the question, right? Losing is what would put you on the hot seat. Winning games in any fashion, you're fine, right? Winning cures all, even if it's like results over process, which we don't love. You know, one of the things that they've got going for them is they've developed young players in a good way. Herb Jones has developed, was a second-round guy they drafted. Same for Jose Alvarado, who's in the rotation. We just put Trey Murphy into the starting lineup, a guy drafted 17th overall that they've developed. Zion, when he's healthy, looks to be a monster and looks like they've finally gotten through to him. And to an extent, they've developed Brandon Ingram a little bit too. His breakout year came his first year in New Orleans when he kind of had the keys to the offense with all of this. They developed Najee Marshall, even if he's gone. You know, what remains to be seen for someone like Jordan Hawkins, but there's a lot of success there, along with a lot of misses too. But that happens, I think, on every team. And they've got some key players that they've drafted, that they've developed, and that's doing well for New Orleans. So that's kind of something that's in, you know, a check mark in their favor here. But it comes down to losing, and how are you losing games? If we see a repeat of what they did last season, unable to close games in clutch situations, you know, lineups that are just too defensive and not working, and then still going to those sorts of lineups, you know, the inability to come back from a double-digit deficit in the second half, or even just blowing a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter of a game, that starts to then get put on everybody. The head coach, you know, is going to take a lot of the blame for that, and the front office is going to take a lot of blame, right? You can say it's one of two things. They're losing because the players aren't good enough, or the coaching's bad. It's going to put both, I think, on the hot seat. Look, if you lose a bunch of close games, but you're right there in the end, I think that's one thing, right? Zion gets injured and misses a ton of time. I don't know if that's really going to put Willie Green on the hot seat. The losses aren't going to be his fault nearly as much, right? Brandon Ingram kind of becomes pouty and like torpedoes the team, which we said in yesterday's show, I don't think is going to happen. You know, that's going to reflect poorly on the front office and not trading him sooner. So all of those things could happen, they could not. And I think this is going to be one of those things where we wait to see what happens before you go in and you're like, oh yeah, they're definitely on the hot seat this year. Right now, after making the playoffs and winning 49 games last year, even if it ended in a sweep in very disappointing fashion, no, I want to say neither's on the hot seat. Right? Like there was a lot, I know we focus on the end of the season, but there was a lot of good last year. Having a top 10 defense 2 years in a row is a very, very good thing. And I think they could be one of the top 5 teams in the league, even while skewing a little bit more offensively like we would like them to do. So there was a lot of good last year. You know, they made the playoffs. Willie Green has made the playoffs 2 out of 3 years and lost in the play-in tournament in the other one. You know, I think that's an encouraging sign for what they're trying to build here. The West is going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. That is for certain here. But Willie Green has won 51.6% of his games. He almost won 60% of the games last year. The winning percentage for the Pelicans at 49 and 33 was 59.8%. It's a really good number. He's 127 and 19 as a head coach. If we were to look at the head coaching record of all the Pelicans coaches, I don't know if I can actually look that up easily. Is he going to be the winningest? He's got to kind of be up there, right? There's been a lot of losing here, and as a head coach, he's arguably had some of the most success. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind with it. But if they start to lose games and you're like, the coaching's doing it, and you could point to some of that last year, yeah, he's going to be on the hot seat. And if they, don't reach their full potential this coming season, and they didn't last year, then yeah, you could say they should go in a different direction. Same thing, right? Like if Brandon Ingram tanks the team or he walks for nothing at the end of next season, that'll put David Griffin on the hot seat. If they manage to trade him at the trade deadline and it's decent, that can kind of change it. You trade him before the start of the season. We're getting a little bit close to that. That's a realistic possibility too. There's ways for them both to be on the hot seat, but I don't think either is on the hot seat, nor should they be on the hot seat just yet. 10 games into the season, I might change my mind. Certainly by the halfway point of the year, we'll have a much better idea of what this team looks like. But I do think they're going to win games this year. There was a lot of good last year, and you're getting a better version of Zion, it looks like. That's always encouraging. So we'll see. Let me see. All right, I'm typing it. Record of Pelicans head coaches. Let's see if that gives it to me. Okay, so here you go. If we want to look at the head coaches, I don't know. I think this is in order. Willie Green is 127 and 19. Stan Van Gundy was 31 and 41. Alvin Gentry was 175 and 225, so 50 games under 500. Monty Williams won 173 games and lost 221. It's not great. Jeff Bauer, oh boy, y'all remember that when the GM of the Pelicans elevated himself in the middle of the year? 34 and 39. Byron Scott, who was the head coach of the most success they've ever had, has a losing record, is a New Orleans head coach of 203 wins, 216 losses. Tim Floyd, 41 and 41. Paul Silas, 47 and 35. Willie Green seems to be, you could argue, the best head coach in franchise history. I don't really know if that is worthy of, putting him on the hot seat right now. I understand it, but probably not exactly it. So let me know what you think. Should he be on the hot seat? Is he on the hot seat? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans this week on Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all on probably Monday. We'll probably do a show on Monday. We're going to kind of get back to a little bit more of a regular schedule so you can start getting back into the groove here with me as the off season winds down. So I'll see y'all on Monday.